Every day at 11:30 a.m., students at Roosevelt Elementary School in Detroit would line up for lunch. Most kids barely noticed the woman serving their food, just another lunch lady in a hairnet and apron. But Margaret Chen wasn't just serving lunch. She was running a secret operation that would feed 200 hungry children every single day. This is the story of how one woman's quiet compassion turned a school cafeteria into a lifeline for families who had nothing left to give. And when the truth finally came out, it changed an entire community forever. Margaret Chen was 58 years old and had been working at Roosevelt Elementary for 12 years. Every morning at 6 a.m., she'd arrive at the school kitchen, tie her apron, and begin preparing meals for 800 students. To most people, Margaret was invisible, just another school employee doing her job. But Margaret had a secret that nobody knew about, not the principal, not the other staff, not even her own family. Margaret grew up in poverty in Taiwan before immigrating to America with her parents when she was 16. She remembered what it felt like to go to bed hungry. She remembered the shame of being the kid who couldn't afford lunch. She remembered how food could mean the difference between hope and despair. For 12 years, Margaret had been watching the children at Roosevelt Elementary. She noticed everything: which kids ate quickly like they hadn't eaten in days, which ones saved half their lunch for later, which ones sat alone because they couldn't afford to buy lunch at all. Detroit was struggling. Many families were unemployed, facing eviction, or choosing between paying rent and buying food. The school's free lunch program helped some kids, but the paperwork was complicated, and many families fell through the cracks. Margaret decided she couldn't just watch anymore. She had to do something. The secret operation begins. 1.5 minutes. 3 years ago, Margaret started her secret mission. It began with one student, a 7-year-old boy named David, who never had lunch money. Margaret would quietly slide him an extra tray when no one was looking. But soon Margaret realized David wasn't the only one. She started paying attention to the lunch line differently. She developed a system to identify hungry children without embarrassing them. Kids who qualified for free lunch, but whose families hadn't completed the paperwork yet. Children from families going through temporary hardship. Students who were too proud to ask for help. Margaret began using her own money to buy extra food. She'd arrive at work an hour early to prepare additional meals. She created a subtle signal system. Children who needed help would simply make eye contact with her, and she'd know. The operation grew. Margaret started buying groceries on weekends and bringing them to school. She'd make extra sandwiches at home. She convinced local suppliers to sell her food at cost, telling them it was for a church program. Margaret was spending $300 of her own money every month, nearly half her salary, to feed hungry children. She worked extra shifts at a local restaurant on weekends to make ends meet. But Margaret was careful. She never wanted the children to feel like charity cases. She made it seem normal, routine. A bigger scoop of mashed potatoes here, an extra bread roll there. The kids thought they were just getting lucky. Margaret's operation became more sophisticated. She started recruiting allies without them knowing they were allies. She befriended the school secretary, Maria Rodriguez, who helped her identify which families were struggling financially. She connected with the school nurse, who told her which kids seemed weak or tired, possible signs of hunger. Margaret developed relationships with local grocery stores. She'd buy day-old bread, dented cans, and produce that was still good but couldn't be sold. She told store managers she was feeding a large family. The janitor, Mr. Williams, unknowingly became part of the operation. Margaret convinced him to let her store extra food in an unused storage room. She told him she was meal prepping for her elderly mother. Margaret's kitchen became a secret command center. She kept mental notes of which children needed help, when they needed it, and how much they could accept without becoming suspicious. She started leaving packages of food in children's backpacks when they weren't looking. Granola bars, crackers, fruit, things that looked like they might have been forgotten in the bag. Margaret even began working with teachers. She'd volunteer to help with after-school programs, always bringing leftover food from the cafeteria. Kids would eat and never realize they were being fed by Margaret's personal mission. The most challenging part was keeping it secret. Margaret couldn't tell anyone, not her husband, not her daughter, not her closest friends. She was afraid that if the school administration found out, they'd stop her or make her follow official procedures that would slow everything down. Margaret's secret almost came out several times. The school's budget manager started questioning why food costs were remaining stable, despite serving more meals. Margaret had to carefully balance official portions with her secret supplements. One day, Principal Johnson noticed that student behavior was improving. Kids seemed more focused, less irritable. Test scores were going up. He couldn't figure out why until he realized it coincided with Margaret's hiring. Margaret had to think fast. She suggested that maybe the new lunch menu was better, or that the kids were just having a good year. She deflected attention away from her operation. The closest call came when Margaret's daughter, Lisa, visited her at work unexpectedly. Lisa saw Margaret's car trunk filled with groceries and started asking questions. Margaret had to convince her that she was buying in bulk to save money. Another time, a parent volunteer noticed Margaret giving extra food to certain children. Margaret quickly explained that she was following special dietary instructions for those students. The parent didn't question it. Margaret realized her operation was getting too big to hide much longer. She was now feeding nearly 200 children every day through various methods. The financial strain was enormous, and the physical demands were exhausting. She started having doubts. Was she doing the right thing? Was she overstepping her boundaries? What would happen if she got caught? Everything changed on a Tuesday in November. Margaret was serving lunch when she noticed 8-year-old Emma Martinez crying in the lunch line. Emma's family had just lost their apartment and was staying in their car. Margaret couldn't help herself. She pulled Emma aside and gave her a full meal, extra milk, and a bag of snacks for later. She told Emma it was extra food that would go to waste anyway. What Margaret didn't know was that Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was watching. Mrs. Patterson had noticed Emma's family situation and was concerned about the little girl's well-being. Mrs. Patterson followed Margaret after lunch and saw her packing food into Emma's backpack. Instead of reporting Margaret, Mrs. Patterson approached her quietly. Mrs. Patterson told Margaret that she knew what she was doing and that she wanted to help. She revealed that several teachers had noticed Margaret's kindness over the years and had been wondering how they could support her efforts. Margaret broke down crying. For 3 years, she'd carried this secret alone. The relief of finally telling someone was overwhelming. Mrs. Patterson convinced Margaret to tell Principal Johnson. They arranged a private meeting where Margaret expected to be fired. Instead, she found something she never expected. Principal Johnson listened to Margaret's story with growing amazement. He wasn't angry. He was inspired. He told Margaret that her secret operation explained so many positive changes he'd observed in the school. Attendance had improved. Academic performance was up. Behavioral problems were down. The school had become a happier, more productive place. And it was all because Margaret had been quietly feeding hungry children. Principal Johnson made a decision that would change everything. Instead of stopping Margaret's operation, he wanted to make it official. He called an emergency meeting with the school board. The school board was initially shocked. They worried about liability, procedures, and budget implications. But when they saw the data, improved test scores, better attendance, happier students, they couldn't argue with the results. They decided to create an official program with Margaret as the coordinator. They would provide the funding, the supplies, and the administrative support. Margaret's secret mission would become Roosevelt Elementary's official anti-hunger initiative. But first, they wanted to honor Margaret for what she'd already done. They calculated that over 3 years, Margaret had personally fed hungry children approximately 50,000 times using her own money and time. The school organized a surprise assembly. Margaret thought she was just serving lunch as usual when Principal Johnson called her to the gymnasium. 200 students were waiting for her, all the children Margaret had helped over the years. Their families were there too, many of them crying as they realized who had been secretly helping them. Margaret was presented with the district's highest honor for community service. The local newspaper wrote a story about her. The mayor gave her a key to the city. But the moment that meant the most to Margaret came when David, the first student she'd helped, now 10 years old, stood up and thanked her. He told everyone that Margaret had saved his life and that her kindness had taught him to help others. Margaret's story spread beyond Detroit. Donations poured in from around the country. The program she started became a model for other schools. Within a year, similar programs were implemented in 50 schools across Michigan. Margaret Chen proved that one person's compassion could change hundreds of lives. She showed that heroism doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes it wears an apron and a hairnet. Today, Margaret still works at Roosevelt Elementary, but now she's not working alone. She has a team of volunteers, official funding, and the support of the entire community. The secret operation became a public mission, and hungry children across Detroit are better fed because one lunch lady refused to look the other way. Margaret's story reminds us that the most powerful changes often start with the simplest acts of kindness. One extra portion, one caring gesture, one person who decides to help. It all adds up to something extraordinary. Heroes work in school cafeterias. They notice the children others don't see, and they feed both bodies and souls. Margaret Chen fed 200 children every day, not because it was her job, but because it was her calling.